Hey there, and welcome to Marriage Talks, a real, authentic, and relatable podcast about how to thrive in your marriage. I'm Elizabeth Ann.
And I'm Michael.
And today we have a very special guest with you. I'm super excited for y'all to get to hear her wisdom and just all the things from her. Lindsay Maestas, right? Did I say it right?
Yes.
Okay.
Very close. Maestas.
Mm-hmm.
It used to be little before I got married, and I sort of resent my husband for making it so difficult. Everyone's like, Mesties, Mastis. I'm like, we should have just stuck with little. It would have been easier. But yes, Maestas. Hi.
Maestas.
Thank you guys so much for having me on.
Yes, we're so excited to have you here. And before we get into today's topic, which I'm very excited to talk about, I do want to read your bio because I'm like, dang girl,
Oh,
you're doing all the things.
Well, what did Ashley send you? Just kidding. Thank you.
Lindsay Maestas is the host of the Living Easy podcast, where she discusses faith and relationships and gives women ideas and opportunities and practical tips for real change, because nothing changes if nothing changes. Lindsay is also a lifestyle blogger, wife, and mama of 2 boys based in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Her work has been featured in Huffington Post, Relevant Magazine, Faith It, Focus on the Family, Better Homes and Garden, and more. She speaks vulnerably about the challenges of relationships and real life while sharing practical wisdom and tips. She loves to read, eat tacos, and binge watch Netflix with her husband.
Yes.
You can follow her on Instagram, Facebook, and Pinterest, or visit her blog at sparrowsandlily.com.
Yeah. Thanks.
So we are so excited for you to speak into our topic today, which, to let the listeners know, is all about dealing with difficult in-laws. And so
Yes.
I gotta say, I love when, your bio says you speak vulnerably, and I love that because I've been listening to you, and for like our listeners who have never heard of you, y'all need to go listen to her because it's
Thank
just,
you.
it's so good. And I also love how you bring the gospel into everything.
I love you guys too. I'm so glad we got connected because I'm so into marriage podcasts, and I wish my husband would, when we do them together, I love them, but he's very introverted. So it takes like a whole lot of energy, but I'm like, oh my gosh, I love your guys' setup. It's so good. It's just so like that. I love it. So I've enjoyed your podcast, but thank you guys for listening and for your sweet words, because that's very kind. It's not always the most comfortable, obviously, to talk about certain things, but I've found 1,000,000% that it just brings so much freedom to people. And so for me, I'm like, okay, Lord, while it might not be incredibly comfortable and sometimes even joyful for me, because there's a lot of fear that can be involved in what I share, I ultimately just see the fruit that God uses that to reach other people who are like afraid to say the same stuff I was afraid to say, And so I think it's just hard because we're all dealing with so many difficult things, like in-laws. People don't talk about that a lot, but it is an extremely common issue that can really damage marriages. And so it's been heavy on my heart to talk about it more, because I do speak with so many couples now who their marriage just feels kind of like they're in the thick of chaos because of other parents who are maybe too invested in the relationship or just very different personality types.
Yeah, that's so true. That's so, because I think to go along with what you're saying is we all feel like whatever it is that we're going through, it's like we're the only one going through it.
Yeah.
And so when you speak into those things and be very candid and vulnerable about them, be like, we go through those things. There's power in speaking those things to like cut it down, because when we internalize it, and I'm excited to get into this topic today because it can feel really lonely, because I think when it comes to dealing with difficult in-laws, we all just try to be really respectful, and try to love well, and sometimes it goes misinterpreted, and so I'm excited to get into it today, because I think it's really going to be helpful for a lot of people.
Yeah, I hope so. I
Yeah.
hope so. Well, I guess I would just start, if that's okay, by sharing a little bit of our story. We're really open with this, and I always address from the beginning that like I have a great in-law relationship. I love my mother-in-law. She is a dream. But what I don't like is that that is so rare. And that sometimes when I say it, I feel like, okay, I don't want to step on toes and be like I'm boasting, which I wish that weren't the case, that just because I have a nice mother-in-law, that's a struggle. But as a boy mama, I get it a little bit now. I don't think I got it before, and I demonized women who treated their daughter-in-laws a certain way. But now as a mom, I'm like, oh man, it would be really hard to let go. And I think that's the biggest kind of crux of it all, is in everything that we do, seeking understanding and grace with one another. Because realistically, we all have different backgrounds. We all have different, like as husband and wife, we have different behaviors. We have different experiences. We have different morals as we're being raised. And our parents are so involved in the raising process of us that to like let our spouse or let our child go can be really, really kind of soul crushing, especially if we feel like we have issue with the woman that they're marrying. However, there isn't always an issue with the woman that they're marrying, and sometimes that's just their personality type. And so it can be really challenging to navigate through feeling as if I don't want my spouse to be separated from their family. They love their family. They're important. But I also don't want this to wreck my marriage. And so I think just to share a little bit of my story, I actually don't talk about this one a lot, but I will talk about it because that's what we do. So my wedding was a little bit of a nightmare, and because of family involved, and it just got really, really messy. And I woke up the next morning from a text from one of our family members on my side, basically on my honeymoon, the morning of my honeymoon, with like, not exaggerating, probably 45 text messages from this person who felt disrespected at the wedding. Now, this is not a norm or like a new thing for this person. It's very normal. So for me, I was just like, even on my honeymoon, like you never fail to surprise me, but like, I'm also not super shocked, you know? And it makes me emotional. The sweetest thing, one of the sweetest things that ever happened between my husband and I was that morning I just woke up and tears started flowing. I was being threatened to be taken out of the will, and which threats of money had always been held over my head for whatever reason. But now it was like the big time. That one was new. Like, now I'm taking you out of my will because I felt disrespected at the wedding. And it was over a speech that like was way too long. That was really all it was. It was nothing big. Where the music was like turned up, because it was like, all right, it's been 10 minutes of a speech and now it's maybe time to dial it in. And it just blew up. And Jesse, my husband, took my phone from me and he said, I respect you. I want a great relationship with you. And they already did have a great relationship. But you will not speak to my wife this way. And if you want to speak to her, you can message me. So I'm going to block your number from her phone, because these messages were pretty hate-filled on my honeymoon morning. And he said, so you can talk to me. And that was like, I sobbed, because I had never felt like I had been protected from that relationship before. And it was a consistently difficult relationship for me. And so that was kind of the way that I started viewing things, as like, wow, that is a man. Like, and not that that needs to be the case in all, but for me, he knew that's what I needed. He knew the history of that relationship, and he stepped in. And that continued when his family had ideas about the way things needed to be with us as parents and the way that we needed to handle our finances. He would step in and say, hey, Lindsay and I are more than willing to come to your house and have this conversation. We want to talk about it. However, I want you to come to me if you have something negative to say, because I want to make sure that it's communicated properly to my wife, who doesn't know you as well as I know you. And so kind of having, and some people might listen to this and think like, wow, he's domineering. And if you know my husband, he is the gentlest, like most quiet soul in the world. And so that's not his heart. It's just been very much like protection over me. And it's probably one of the things I'm most grateful for in my life. And so while it's not that we have not had any issues, it's just been more so that they've been handled right off the bat. Like they've just been dealt with and understood. And I think from somebody who may be not understanding, like, okay, why can't his parents come to you? Why can't they have these conversations? I think first thing you think of is when you're in your house and say a friend comes over and they somehow get a hold of your computer and start looking through your bank statements. And they're like, wow, you really need to figure out your finances. Or if I were you, I would do this. Or they come to your house when you're parenting and they're like, this needs to change. Like, you guys need to change your ways. You would feel incredibly offended. You would feel like, please back off a little bit. It's invasive. And we, especially as a newly married couple, you're already trying to get your bearings. You're already trying to get life going and like understand one another. And those first few years can be some of the most difficult for people. And then having this involved other people who are just making it more difficult, it's hard. So the hard part is like, okay, a lot of people might think, well, why can't you come into this? And with the struggles you already have, it's like, having been outside of that contact and the difficulty has been so freeing for me, because I'm like, I don't have a desire. I have my own family struggles. I've grown up with my own issues. Taking on another burden of someone that I don't fully understand or know, and who does not know me fully, is really challenging. Like it's a lot. And so to have that freedom has been a huge weight off of my shoulders. And I think what we have to understand is there's this feeling of betrayal. So say Jesse in that hotel room the honeymoon morning had said, well, he's right. She's right. She is right. You shouldn't have done that, or this shouldn't have happened, or you shouldn't have allowed it, or writing to that person and saying, I don't know, just like siding with them ultimately would make me feel betrayed, because that can be a conversation between the two of us. If I had done something wrong, tell me. I will own up to my junk. I want to know. However, don't incorporate another person to be siding with them, which it feels high school a little bit. But I mean, these are very, very intimate relationships with a mother and a father and a wife. And if they're tearing you apart, the best time to do that is at the beginning of the marriage, because that's really when the enemy wants in, And so, long story long, it's been an eye-opener for me to realize how important it is to protect and guard that marriage, because it is like throughout scripture, you see in Genesis, leave and cleave, leave your mother and father and cling to your wife. There's a reason that there's a calling on that. I mean, God knew this was going to be a struggle and an issue. And that doesn't mean that you have to separate yourself from your in-laws, but it does mean that you cling to your wife or your husband first and foremost, because at the time you make those vows, you then do not betray those vows. You cling to your wife or your husband.
Oh, I love it. I need like a big amen button right now.
You need that roadcaster.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that you brought up Genesis 2:24, because
Bam.
we have that tattooed,
Yeah.
and that's our favorite verse.
Dang, that's good.
That's
And
it's one.
Yeah.
Leave your father and mother and become one.
Yeah.
One.
And that's that
It's
word.
that translation of the word one, and that is the verse that we run back to, like you're saying, like that's the relationship that needs to be cared for. And that's not to say that other relationships aren't important,
Right.
but like you said, when you say those vows, that's a
it.
covenant, and you're coming
Yeah.
together. And we've had ongoing conversations throughout our many years being married that we do have to be careful, like you said, the picking sides, and it does feel like a betrayal when either one of us choose someone who is not our spouse, like the person
Mhm.
we are married to. And so it's really been good to walk through those times to maybe say like, that really wasn't the best way to handle it, but talking to each other about it and not airing out that dirty laundry.
That's good.
But really protecting that marriage. And I love that Jesse did that, because that's huge. And I think sometimes with the way we view maybe marriage is that like the woman handles everything. And I'm pretty confident in that you would agree with like the man is the head of the house.
Yes.
And that's a relationship that and that's not to say that we don't bring anything to the table.
We're the neck. We turn the head.
There you go.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
My
like,
mother-in-law always says that, actually.
I think that's from My Big Fat
Greek
Greek
Wedding.
Yeah. I love that movie.
But I think that people have a really negative connotation of that, or perception of that the man is the head of the home. It's very negative. And for me, even in this situation, in so many situations, when there's a decision that needs to be made, I'm like, the Lord has given you that calling and that responsibility. And honestly, I don't want that. So I freely accept that role. I think I have much more of a type A personality than type B. So sometimes, a lot of the time, I take control of many situations that I feel like I understand better or that I want to handle. But then there are a lot that he takes. And so there's this equal partnership. But for us, when it comes to that point of, for me, submission, or him, leadership, we own those roles. And I feel like we embrace them because it helps us to be healthier.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I agree. It's kind of like unpopular to do a hierarchy like that, but it works well. It works really well, and it's biblical too. So we found that as long as both parties understand that really well, there's not as much conflict about that, other than just like outsiders having a dislike for that setup. But it works great for us.
And I think too, what gets misunderstood is that submission is like and interpreted as very weak when it's really not.
Yeah.
It's not at all. Both roles are.
Take strength.
Yes. Both roles are equally challenging in their own right, and that's why they work so well together. But I think, were you gonna add?
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, and any husband or head of the household who's leading like my way or the highway, like without the input of your wife, like that's terrible anyway. Like it's not gonna work. So it's like you have input, you have joint decisionship on mostly everything. I mean, it works.
Well,
way.
and having the backing of loving like Christ loves the church, because like you're saying, he's not coming at it from a domineering perspective, but saying, I'm going to love you like Christ loves the church, and therefore I'm going to lead our home with that love. And I think that's what comes into, because I do think typically, and not to generalize, but typically it is the woman who struggles with the mother-in-law. Like and sometimes the father-in-law tends to be the most common struggle. And I think that a lot of the time, kind of like we're talking about, is knowing our position in our marriage, knowing what God has called us to in our marriage, and having that communication with one another. Because there were times when Jesse and I would get in fights. Like I said, this is a huge issue amongst newly married couples, amongst couples who've been married. I have somebody in my life who's been married, I think 14 or 15 years, and it is still an issue with her mother-in-law constantly. And she's really learned to navigate through some things. But I guess if it's okay, I'll start with just some ways to deal with difficult in-laws. And so I want to say, first off, I'm speaking to difficult in-laws, not marriage destroying, toxic, really, unhealthy in-laws. Like there's issues, there's maybe disrespect, there's boundary breaking, but it's not like, I hate you, you're a horrible woman or husband. These are just difficult. So because I think that there's a whole other conversation to be had when someone needs to be completely cut off. Yeah. But for this one, where you might think they need to be cut off, but it's only because they bother you or they annoy you or you feel like they're trying to steal your husband a little bit. I would say the first thing is to build your own relationship with them. And everything I'm about to say takes 100% strength in the Lord. This is not something you're going to do on your own. This is not something you're going to want to do for someone who, the thing with it is that building a relationship with this person who is trying to invade your relationship, which you feel they're getting in the way of the most important relationship of your life, that has to be done by the strength of Jesus. I think if we try to do it in our own strength, we'll grow resentful, we'll grow bitter and angry and frustrated because it's not going to go the way you want it to go. I think we can envision like, okay, I'm going to put myself out there. I'm going to invite them to do this and it's going to go smoothly. And it could go absolutely horrendously, but you have to choose in that moment to love, because Jesus says he will know us by our love. He will know that we're his disciples by our love. And that doesn't mean that we don't create boundaries in order to love people better and have healthy kind of restrictions on what we do with these people. But I think oftentimes in in-law relationships, we try to live that relationship through our spouse, especially if it feels tumultuous. And what I have found for myself is when I feel really uncomfortable with maybe something that was said at a dinner, or when I feel as if just everyone's against me, because I still have, my husband has a huge like Hispanic, super close family. I come from a family of a very, very, very small family. And I'll walk into the room sometimes and I'm like, man, you guys share your opinion way too much. Like, just stop. Stop talking to me. I am too sensitive. I didn't grow up in this huge family where everyone shares everything that they're thinking. And so sometimes I'll leave like, oh, they hate me or they think this. And he's like, you're crazy. They love you. And actually near the beginning of our marriage, I had a moment where I had a dream that my mother-in-law was trying to get us to split up. And I realized in that moment, I have some weird feelings here. They've not really been talked about. I could go to my husband and gossip, which will fuel my fire. And it was because of something that had happened. I can gossip to him, which will fuel my fire. I can allow myself to get frustrated. Or I can call her and I can be like, hey, do you want to go and get lunch? To sort of resolve my issues, but also maybe to come to a place where I can just get to know her on a personal level. And I think sometimes I would strongly, actually mostly encourage doing a side-by-side relationship builder. So most of the time women like to do face-to-face relationship. Men like side-by-side, building cars together, playing games, going golfing. Women like to go and have coffee and face-to-face. But when you're trying to build a relationship with a difficult in-law or someone you don't know very well, doing things together that you both enjoy can be so helpful, because you don't have to sit and have this really awkward conversation that you don't want to have and sit face to face with someone that you don't want to be at lunch with. You can go get your nails done and sit side by side, or you can go to a movie and sit side by side where you don't have to have a ton of conversation. And this is not to say she or he will be totally up for that type of relationship, but you have to put the foot forward. Yes, they're older. Yes, they're the parent. That doesn't matter. You, for me, I believe, as a believer, are called to live above reproach. You are called to lean in to what Jesus says, which is to love, to bless those who curse you, to not hold record of wrongs, because perfect love, which is Christ's love that he pours into us, does not hold record of wrongs. And this means that you don't walk away from that family dinner and say, this family dinner, she or he said this. Do you remember 2 months ago when she or he said this, and then a year ago? Because what does that do? It builds a root creates a root deep into our hearts that instills bitterness and anger. And instead of just seeing it as like a one-off, okay, she or he was really rude this dinner, or really disrespectful, or didn't even speak to me, and they only spoke to my spouse. It's hurtful. But if I keep going back to all of the other times they did the same thing, that will damage my relationship with them and also my relationship with my husband. And again, we are guarding that. And your husband or your wife, whoever the parent issue is with, they love their family. And the more you tear down their family and the more you find issue with their family, you are going to become the cause, kind of, I don't know the word, but like inadvertently become the cause of the damage, allowing your in-laws to infiltrate rather than saying we, like we talked about in Genesis, we are one and we come together as one, we fight as one, and we do everything as one, even when it's hard. But that also means that I respect my husband, I respect my wife enough to love their parents, or to try to love their parents. Ephesians 6 says, honor your father and mother. And when you say those vows, your in-laws are your father and mother. So again, like, these are not easy things to do. It is challenging, but that is where fruit comes in our lives. That's where pruning and sanctification comes, is when the rubber meets the road and we are being sharpened by those thorns that we feel like, gosh, Lord, remove this person, remove this relationship. Let me just live peacefully with my spouse. But I believe so strongly that he uses those difficulties in those relationships to strengthen us toward one another.
Yeah.
Well said. That's amazing. I'm like,
I love that.
I'm with you.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
I love too the example that you gave, like not bringing up those past like hurts in our own mind. I do think that sometimes to in the interest of like having a stronger relationship, or at least establishing a relationship with a difficult in-law, like you can say to your spouse, like, it just really bothered me, or it really bummed me out that I didn't feel included. And not to like point fingers and to say they didn't do this and they said that, but
That's
to just
good.
be like,
Yeah.
I would love for us maybe next time we get together that we be aware of maybe ways that I could feel more included. Because when you bring those two families together, like Michael brings all these inside jokes and like history, and then I bring inside jokes and history, and he can feel left out and I can feel left out. And so I think there's definitely a way to communicate that without being hurtful. Because like you said, if you bring up all those things and you as the spouse bringing up all those past wrongs become a catalyst for like cutting the marriage in half, and that's not what you want to do. I love that that you brought that up, of the side by side. I think that's so good. That's so good.
Well, and going back to your point, I think also respecting the power of our words, not only to our spouse, but towards our in-laws, because Proverbs 18:21, I pulled it up, but the tongue has the power of life and death. And it really does. And especially in the sense of relationships, because it's always, and I talk about this a lot on the Living Easy podcast, the little foxes. It's those little things that dig into our marriage that we may not even realize how much they are damaging the vineyards in our marriage. You'll see it in Song of Solomon if you read it. But I think it's the same thing with this, is if you start making snarky remarks when you get in the car about the mom or the sister or the dad, and granted, I've had moments where I've wanted to, like, I want to, your sinful nature wants to feel that sense of release of like, I didn't deserve that. I didn't earn it. So now you carry the weight. But your spouse is not supposed to carry the weight. They didn't do it. Yes, a spouse should step in and step up. I strongly, obviously, believe that. But I think also to place the blame on them when they aren't the ones who made you feel that way necessarily, or they didn't intend to, you know, their character, is really important. So just knowing the power of your words, that those small comments here and there when you leave or when you're getting there, like, can you please not do this? Or maybe your mom is going to be nice this time, or, you know, those sarcastic remarks, they really do dig a ditch and can bring death to your marriage. But if you choose to speak graciously and in a way that builds up your spouse, like, you know what, I love you, and today I'm going to try really hard. Like, I'm going to sit down, even though I don't want to, with this person, and I'm going to try to just ask them what they're doing. Like, everyone loves someone who just asks questions about them. Like, that's people's favorite thing. Like, that's the fastest way to make a friend. So I'm going to sit down with your mom or your sister or your brother, and I'm going to ask them all about their business and all about themselves and just how things are going. And I don't want to, and they might be really rude, but I love you enough and your family's important enough to me that I will lay down my own pride, my own selfishness, my own desires, and even like my own rights really in this situation if I feel like I have the right to be mean to them or whatever. And I'm going to love you above that. And I'm going to love Jesus first and foremost above all of that. And I think those words bring life, that hope, that willingness to step outside of ourselves, that brings real life. And I think just like you were saying earlier, that I think sometimes when we use words like I feel or I felt, they teach that in therapy. I think we do counseling. They don't teach us that, but just saying like I feel or I felt this is a lot less harsh than saying how dare they or they're so this, because really that just again creates a massive wedge in the relationships. And so I think the underlying part of everything with dealing with difficult relationships is one, healthy communication between you and your spouse. And if you're struggling with that, go to counseling. We talk about it all the time on the podcast. Go to counseling, go to counseling, go to counseling. You do not need to be putting out the fire. You're trying to prevent the fire. So go, just get some insight. We have so many couples in our lives who pour into us and share their experiences, and we glean and we listen because we want to prevent as much drama in our marriage as we possibly can. And by learning from other people's mistakes is one of the best ways to do that. But healthy communication, respecting the power of the words, side-by-side efforts, respecting one another's feelings too, because I think it's so important on the other end of the spectrum to validate their feelings. You know what? I didn't even see what you saw. I thought she or he was actually really nice to you, but I completely understand that you feel it differently and you don't know them like I know them. And you may just perceive things like not to diminish what they're saying either, but that you see it that way. And therefore I completely understand where you're coming from. What would you like me to do? Because most of the time when women complain, at least like on my end, I just really want Jesse to listen to me. And so now we have a new thing where he'll ask me, do you want me to listen or do you want me to fix?
Yeah.
And sometimes with the in-law things, do you do the same thing?
Yeah.
We had our last couple we interviewed, they're friends of ours from college, and Susie, the wife, literally said the same type of thing. Like when Cleveland comes home from a super busy day, she's like, do you want me to listen or fix? And I think she had a third one too. But
Or to be left alone.
Oh,
You
yeah.
just need
Or
to
do you need
like
to
alone
Oh.
time to decompress.
That's
So
good.
it's so
Yeah.
cool that you said that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it has helped so much because my husband is hardcore. Like, although he's a peacemaker, he just wants a solution right away. And it would cause so much frustration with us because sometimes even with my difficult relationships, he'd be like, okay, it's not that bad, but like, let me just message them. And I'm like, no, I just want you to listen to me and tell me it sucks. Like, just tell me
Yeah.
this sucks
Yeah.
and I'm right. Like,
That's
give
important.
me minutes to cool down and think logically. And then you can come to me and tell me like whatever. But if you would try to fix it right away, I would just get more angry and I would feel that sense of betrayal that we talked about at the beginning where I'm not being sided with, which wasn't his intention. But I think when there's a point of like, I will just hear you and acknowledge your feelings. And then later when things are smooth sailing, I'll say, hey, remember that time, or he will, remember that time I did feel like you perceived that incorrectly. Let me explain why. And then you tell me what you felt. But to not just be like, no, you're wrong, or just get over it, because that again creates a wedge. And I think this is the biggest thing is the enemy wants to destroy. He wants to seek, kill, and destroy everything that we have. And that includes one of the greatest ministries of our lives, which is marriage. And he's going to do that. You know, he will do that if we allow him to. And so I come to it from a place of, Lord, I will do anything to not get divorced. I will do anything to protect my marriage, anything. And if that means laying down a little bit of pride and feeling uncomfortable at a family dinner and whatever, again, creating healthy boundaries, like With some of my family members, we see them once every 2 months for a 30-minute period. And the 30 minutes hits and we're like, oh, shoot, we got to be here, you know? And we're really strict with that because we know that's all that we as a couple can handle. And if we need to do things individually, that's great. But as a couple, we know what works for us and our marriage comes first. But in those 30 minutes, I'll say, okay, or he'll say, I'm keeping my mouth shut. We're going to smile and we're going to get through it. We're going to love them because it is important that we love them and show them the light of Christ. And then we just graciously move on rather than being there for 2 hours and seeing them twice a month and getting into argument after argument after argument, either between us or with them. So I know that was a lot. That was like a rant. I'm sorry. I'm passionate about the topic.
Oh, it's good. It's all good. It's all good stuff because, like you're saying, boundaries. And I think sometimes people perceive boundaries as really constricting, but I think boundaries are so freeing. So for you, the every 2 months for 30 minutes, it's a boundary and you guys thrive in that. Like that's a space that you guys you're like, that's our expiration time and we know it and we've established that, you know, within the marriage and we feel comfortable with it. And we say, all right, this is what we're committing to. And then you feel like you're setting yourself up for success as opposed to setting yourself up for failure. And so I think that marriages that have the difficult in-laws, being able to set up those boundaries and then also communicating those boundaries where like Michael's boundary for something way more relaxed, whereas mine are way more like confined, so to speak. It's like, okay, well, how do we have that happy medium? You know, where he gives a little and I give a little. And like you said, that pride just has to be pushed to the side because it will infiltrate and it will destroy like those little foxes. And before you know it, you've just planted one nasty weed in your marriage and it's not a good thing.
Amen.
So I love that. I think boundaries are big. Those are really, really
And I think especially as a Christian to not see them as the world sees them, which is to keep the world out. And to kind of like put them behind the fence, but in a sense of I create boundaries so I can love you better. Because in those 30 minutes, I am a much nicer person than I would be if I didn't create those boundaries. I can invest more, love more because my emotional energy tank is not being completely drained by the person that it doesn't work with. And so being just really mindful of ourselves and our needs and our spouse's needs, like you're saying, is huge because it's not, the perception of it is so important because when you hear create boundaries, it's a negative connotation so often, but it really can be seen as this is a really sweet thing that you're doing for your marriage and also just to better like serve the people around you and to give them the best parts of yourself and what God has called you to in a healthy way. Like it just doesn't have to be a negative thing.
Yeah, I'm with you there.
Yeah, and I think with boundaries for anybody who has maybe some difficult in-laws, if the relationship is there and maybe it might be where like the spouse that comes from that particular side, if there's an opportunity to sit down and kind of establish some boundaries, if there's just been a lot of maybe friction, but both parties are willing to talk about it, I think talking about maybe first and foremost expectations, because I think like as people who get married, we bring our own expectations into what we think the marriage is going to look like and then how our relationships with other people will be. But also I think as in-laws, like I know that like my parents, whether they realized it or not, had expectations for us that they think are good, and same with Michael. And I think sometimes when expectations aren't met, that's when we get like that friction. And so I think if somebody might be in a place where like you can say, you know, hey, Dad, I know that this is something that maybe you want for us, but maybe we're just not there yet. Or like, I love that you care for us so much, but we would love a little bit of room in this space. Like just allow us to work through it together. So if there's an opportunity to have that conversation and to be honest, but in also a loving and respectful way, like, thank you for caring for us so much. And then kind of protecting your marriage with the next statement, I think would also be really helpful. And not everybody's going to have that opportunity.
Good.
But I think if the opportunity
But if you try to make the effort, I do think that, that's really important, because it opens a door for humility, which we all need a little more of, and everyone, and just saying like, you know what, you might be totally right, but we kind of want to screw this up on our own. Like, let us just try it and see if we can do it on our own. And if not, then, you know, but we are trying this. Like, you guys went through it as a couple, or as now you're an adult, or you're older than us, you went through it, but let us just kind of fight through it as well. But I think that's good to voice those expectations, because there really are, you have so many different personalities coming into one situation, and they truly all want the best. And I think that's the thing, is just believing the best about one another, believing the best about your spouse, believing the best about your in-laws, and just saying, I may not perceive this from their actions, but I choose to believe they're not ill-willed. I choose to believe they're not malintentioned. I choose to believe that they do have some kindness in there, which I think is where the side-by-side relationship really helps too, is getting to know like the sweet side of them. So,
I love that.
Yeah. I'm like,
Choosing
I could talk
to
about
believe.
this forever.
Yeah, no, it's good.
So one of the reasons why I'm like, yeah, that's great, because like everything you're saying rings so true. We've walked through so much of this stuff. We started off on rocky ground, just wedding planning with lots of outside influence, and like the first few years were just like really tough. Like, just, you know, every time we're gonna make a decision or get together, I kind of have to psych myself up. Like, all right, in what ways can I prevent something going seriously wrong? In what ways am I going to expect certain things to go wrong? And how am I going to tackle that when it does happen? And then I think Elizabeth will be the first one to say she sees things very black and white. So with this stuff, it was like, no, I know that it's this way. Like, and that softened so much as she's been able to take on like a very, like, I think you've been in prayer about it. I know you have.
For sure. In
prayer about it, and just seeking to have a different heart and outlook towards it, and just like, Lord, change my heart towards this issue. And it's honestly been a lot smoother. There's been, you know, like lots of good movement and stuff in that direction. But you gotta submit yourself to it, and you just can't keep assuming the worst.
Yeah, and I think the hard thing when maybe you like come together with in-laws, and if you kind of like anticipate that it's going to be bad, I feel like you've already set your heart up for disappointment. They're like, oh my gosh, you know, like,
that's true.
So it's the hard thing I think for a lot of people who have been hurt just repeatedly is, how do I still go into this relationship and be around this person and love them when I am so hurting? You know, like when like, because we automatically want to protect ourselves, protect our hearts, so we put up a wall, and so it's like, I think maybe if you have some words of wisdom of like, how would you encourage somebody to go into a situation where you've been repeatedly hurt by someone, to not only protect your own heart, but to love them well, like, because it's a balance, and it's a balance for I feel like every single minute, every single situation. And I would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. I think first and foremost, I mean, I'm really big, obviously what I do, podcasting, I'm really big on communication. I communicate. Okay, let me step back. I used to overwhelm people with my thoughts because I just wanted to share what was on my heart. And I felt like if it was on my heart, it needed to be talked about. And I really squashed people's spirits a lot, because I didn't ever think beforehand, like, I need to go to Jesus and make sure this is actually something that needs to be discussed. And so that has been a transformation for me, to where I go to Jesus and I'm like, okay, this hurt. This is frustrating and exhausting, and I keep going to this place. I need to go to Jesus and ask him, like, does this need to be a conversation? If it does need to be a conversation, then I think that we should go to that person. And most of the time I will say your spouse needs to be there. And it's very helpful to have a mediator as well, someone who's really unbiased, if it gets to that point and it needs to be really discussed. But I think if it's a point where you can just go and you have a relatively okay relationship and you're coming to terms, then you say, I'm going to just be uncomfortable for a minute and I'm going to go to them, because the Bible calls us to go to one another, and I'm going to have this conversation. It might go really poorly, and you might know from like the beginning, this is not going to go well. And that's when you get a mediator or have your spouse come, or you just deal with it with Jesus and pray, because prayer should not be a last resort. Like, that really should be. God is the only one who can change hearts. We cannot change the heart of our father-in-law, our mother-in-law, our sister-in-law. We really have to rely on him to do so. So I think going to one another obviously can clear the air sometimes. If that isn't an option, I think back to my friend, again, who's been married for 14 years, and what she's very wise, and I so value her input. And she's had a lot of pain with it, of being told she doesn't deserve her son because she can't cook, that she doesn't parent her children well, and she makes way too many mistakes with her children, who are great kids, by the way. She gives her opinion very passive aggressively in any setting, especially holiday settings when it's in front of people. She'll put her down. And it's very, very toxic. So for years, they actually had to create those boundaries to not see her together hardly at all, which was really difficult on their marriage. It caused a lot of strife. But now what she tells me, because she will be there pretty consistently. She'll come to events and things like that. And she says, I just suck it up. Like, I suck up my time. I suck up the fact that this is the relationship that I have to deal with. And I pray before she comes over. I speak with my husband before she comes over, and we have a very general understanding that if I get into a conversation, you kind of come swoop me out, And this is after years and years and years of really trying to have conversations about it. And so what she says, she's like, you know what? I love her by letting her in my home, by having dinners, by continuing her relationship with her son and not allowing that to be something that it gets separated. But ultimately, I just have to pray for her, and I have to lift her to Jesus. And he gives me strength every time she's over to continue loving her. And she said, sometimes I'll invite her to go and do something with just me. But again, it's like we talked about, the very short spurts. But I think going back to the very beginning of this conversation, it comes down to your own heart of, Lord, I am dying to myself and I cannot do this on my own. And trusting Jesus to give you that strength, that the Holy Spirit has already filled your heart, which means you have the fruits of the Spirit. You just have to enable them ultimately. And there are some people who cause you to pour out a lot more negativity. But I heard a pastor say a long time ago, if a cat tips over a glass of milk and milk pours out, then there was milk in the cup. If he tips over a glass and nothing comes out, then nothing was in the cup. And it's the same for us in difficult relationships. If somebody pokes one button that we don't want poked and we lash out and we're passive aggressive, or we're actively angry, or we go home just fuming, that's what's already living in our heart. If they push that button and we leave and say, man, that sucked, I'm hurt, and that's it, and you didn't respond, you didn't act out of anger, and you say, can we pray? Like, pray for my heart because I'm feeling a whole lot of things right now. Like, it's not a sin to feel angry. It's a sin to act out of that anger.
Right.
But I think that is, we really have to determine, are they really pushing us to that limit? Or is this just something that I really need to navigate through with the Lord right now? Because if it's coming out, it's there. And really what flows from our mouth is in our hearts. And so I think that's a big part of it, is allowing Jesus to sanctify us. Because people, I mean, look at the life of Jesus. If we compare this persecution of in-laws, again, I don't have difficult in-laws, but I do have difficult family members. So that's where I'm going with this, not being judgmental at all. Because I've struggled more than anyone in being kind and showing Jesus to some people in my life. But I will say, look at his life. He was persecuted. He was accused. He was slandered. He was beaten physically, bloodied, mocked. I mean, everything. And what did he do? He encouraged people to look to the Father. Like, that's all. That was his response. And everything was look to the Father. And he was quiet and he asked them questions. And he had moments, very few, but he had moments of anger. But it was righteous anger. And I think sometimes we may have that righteous anger, but are we then sinning just to go against somebody else's sin? It doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense. It's not the love of Christ. And so I think looking at his life and seeing, okay, this is really just a speck in the sand of, yeah, it's really hard, but look at the life he lived and look how faithful he was to just point people to eternity and to the kingdom. And that's really all that is called of us. So if we can live there and just say, I mean, it's going to take time and training, because we have to train our minds with scripture. And so memorizing scriptures that help you to cope, that help you to love, that help you to remember that you have been forgiven of so much. And when I look at myself, I'm like, Lord, you have forgiven me of filth, of promiscuity, of codependency, of sexual promiscuity, all of these things. And I still am loved. Like, I'm still pure. So if I've been forgiven much, I can forgive my father-in-law, mother-in-law, sister-in-law much again and again, because Jesus forgives us, 100 times a day probably, and he pours that grace upon us. And who are we to say, I don't have that to offer to somebody? I mean, really, it's just the foundation of it is checking our own hearts and realizing the thorns, the catfish that chase us around are really there to strengthen us and to put us on our knees and on our faces to love Jesus more. And that's the foundation of our life. And that's, if we can get there with training, how joyful that would be for us.
Yeah, I feel like
Love
there's
it.
so much to unpack there. As you're talking, I'm like, ooh, I got some praying to do. Like, I gotta.
Same.
I was convicted for sure.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
I do love, though, that you said just like the way we react to certain situations reveals what's in our heart. And I think that's really important because we're so quick to pull the speck out of somebody else's eye, but ignore the log in our own. And
yes.
I think that's super, super important to remember. And of course, ego and pride gets in the way. We just want to point the fingers. But to put that to the side and to just be like, oh, whoa, I'm lashing out in lots of nasty stuff. Like, wait a minute. I think that's really, I think that's really important to assess, because I think in a difficult in-law situation, and just as sinful humans, we're very quick to point the finger. And so if we can take a step back, adding to what you were saying is praying for the difficult person. And when you truly pray for somebody, it's really hard to dislike them. You can't if you're really praying for them.
Yeah.
And so
not just for them to be fixed and nice to you, but like, Lord, give them all the joy, fill them with your spirit, make them successful in life and in their relationships. Like, it's hard to get that off of your tongue. And I think the more that you train and practice and do it, and just kind of repetition, because it doesn't come naturally sometimes. Like, that's the work of the Spirit. But that eventually, like you're saying, it really does. I always say, like, you cannot hate someone from up close. And I think when you're praying for someone and you're really considering them, and you know that the Lord loves them and created them, and that they just sin just like you do, just in a different way, it's really difficult to hate them.
It's good.
Wow. Yeah, it's well said. I just can't say enough. Well, Lindsay, we really appreciate your time with us tonight.
yeah.
Just it's amazing. It's one
You're
of those,
feeding my
having me.
soul.
Yeah.
I was like, keep coming, sister.
Oh.
yeah, it's one of those subjects
Thank
where
you.
like even like
guys are
planning for the episode is like, oh man, that's gonna be kind of tough to talk about. But the approach that you brought tonight is just like, it's amazing. I wish I could find other words for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all Jesus. All
Yeah.
Jesus. I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm a hot mess express, so I always say on Living Easy, I'm like, man, I'm not coming from a place of having achieved this. There's nothing in my life I've achieved. And I'm sure you guys feel the same. It's like, there's things that I have grown in and been sanctified in by God's grace, but there's always so much work to be done. And if people saw my life, like, we can preach all day long about what we should do, what we can do. But when we're really tested in it, when I'm really tested in it, it's an entirely different story, you know? And so I think just to end with that maybe is, I can say all of these things and I believe them to be true, but to live them out is challenging. And so having people who can hold you accountable to it, continuing waking up in the morning and the first thing you set your sights on is not scrolling on your phone, but like on God's word to prepare you for the day, whether you're seeing in-laws or whether it's just a normal day, but really being intentional with what your relationships look like, but that it's not going to be easy and you're going to screw up. In the first maybe 20 times that you try this and you try to go to lunch, you end screaming, or you know what I mean? But don't give up that. Don't give up on that, because God continues to prune, and every single day the Holy Spirit allows us to wake up with new mercies and a new heart. And so as a Christian, you're not the same person today as you were yesterday. I mean, truly, because we just are filled with the power, the majesty of an ever loving, ever present, ever powerful God who moves in us. And so just don't give up. When it's hard, it will be hard. Don't give up. Don't just allow the enemy to win. And I will be right along with you, failing and falling and trying to get back up, because relationships are messy, so messy.
Yeah.
But they can be so sweet. And so it's just, it's a fight to the finish line.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fight the good fight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good. Oh, so
Well, thank
good.
you guys.
I'm
You are
just,
so
like,
lovely.
soaking
I've
it all
enjoyed
in.
my time. You're so sweet. So thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you for coming on. I'm just so thankful that we connected, because I really truly believe that the words that you brought, and just everything, I just know that it's not only spoken to us, but I know that a lot of our listeners, it will be very fruitful, and I just pray that it will bless them, and that they will, really take it to heart. So thank you so much for sharing and
you.
being vulnerable
Thank you,
and
guys.
honest, and
Sure.
I just love it. I love it.
Sure. Thank you guys for your ministry.
Oh,
Continue pursuing it.
yeah.
I know it's not the easiest thing. Sometimes it's really up and down and can feel like just disappointing sometimes, like you're just not getting to where you want to be, or like you're constantly spinning wheels. I feel that pretty much every day. And so, but what you're doing is important. So just remember that, because it can be a lot, but the Lord's work is always so worth it. And so the conversations that you guys have been having have blessed my heart. And so
You're making me cry.
push on. Oh.
That's
You're
very
so
sweet.
cute.
Thank you, Lindsay.
We need to be friends. We could just cry together.
Yes. Yes. We can eat tacos together.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. Thank you. You are so precious. Thank you. And thank you for, again, to all of our listeners, if you have not listened to Lindsay's podcast, the Living Easy podcast, listen to it. It is good.
Oh, yeah.
Good stuff.
Yes.
Good stuff. It's really
Thank you.
blessed me. And so we so appreciate your time, and so thankful. So thankful for you.
Thanks for having me. I'm honored. And we'll talk soon. We'll keep in
Yes,
touch.
please.
Yeah.
Please.
Okay.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Bye.
See ya.
Oh my goodness. That was so good. It was
Yes.
so good. We hope that you enjoyed that episode. We hope that you learned something from it because, like we said at the beginning, we learned just so much from it. We are so thankful for Lindsay and for her sharing her heart and just bringing it all. She laid it all out and it was fantastic. And we would love it if you would share this episode with a friend or on social media. I think that we need a little more of this kind of thing going on, being passed around. So it was, we loved it. We loved talking to her and she will definitely be back for sure.
Yeah. So guys, thank you again. We'll see you next time.
Bye.